All right, the learner. So you're here because you want to get smart
Yeah,
fast without, feeling totally overwhelmed.
absolutely.
That's what we go for with these deep dives.
That's right.
We're going to take a whole bunch of information and kind of boil it down to the essential stuff,
Yeah.
the stuff that's actually going to make a
Make a
difference
difference.
in the way you see the world.
Yeah, and how you make decisions.
And today
We're diving into a classic,
we are.
Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Huge book. Huge.
It's had a big impact.
Yeah. I mean,
On
really,
a lot of fields.
it's one of those books that has
Other
sort of permeated the culture. Like you see
Yeah.
it everywhere.
Law.
Yeah, and it's all about
Where?
the quirks of your own mind
Yeah.
and how to make better decisions.
Okay,
That's
so
it.
big idea from Thinking Fast and Slow
Yeah.
is that we have these two
Two systems of thinking.
systems of thinking.
System 1,
System one.
System 2.
System two. System one is the fast, intuitive, emotional response.
Oh, like autopilot.
Like autopilot. Yeah,
Yeah.
it just happens automatically
Yeah,
without
it's-
effort.
Recognizing someone's face,
Yes.
knowing that 2 plus 2 is 4.
Those are perfect
Right.
examples of System one in
Oh,
action.
Now, it's not just stuff that's hardwired
Which
into
one are
our
you-
brains.
No, it can also be
Ooh.
things we've learned
Oh,
and practiced.
okay.
So, for example,
Mm.
reading or understanding social cues,
Yeah.
those become System one processes.
We do them with
Over time, you've done them so many times,
Yeah.
you don't even think about it anymore.
Okay.
It's just automatic.
So this idea of
Yeah.
associative activation.
So that's a fascinating thing.
Explain that.
So System one
Yeah.
is really good at linking ideas together
Okay.
rapidly.
Okay.
So let me give you an example.
Right.
Think about the words bananas vomit. Even just reading those two words
Yeah.
triggers like this cascade of
Yeah.
related thoughts and feelings in your mind.
Yeah.
And it's all
Not good ones.
often unpleasant, but it's all happening automatically,
And quickly.
effortlessly.
Without even thinking.
Yes.
Okay.
So you're not choosing to think about those things.
So this then leads to the idea of cognitive ease.
Yes.
Explain that.
So when System one is kind of operating smoothly, when things feel
Yeah.
familiar and coherent,
Uh-huh.
we experience cognitive ease.
Okay.
And so it's like it just feels easy
Easy.
and fluent.
Yeah.
And this feeling of ease
Yeah,
is
right.
really important
Yeah.
because it's often linked to our sense of truth.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So research has shown that simply being exposed to a statement
Okay.
repeatedly can increase our belief in its validity,
Just because
just because it starts to feel familiar.
we've heard it a bunch.
Right.
Okay, so that's kind of scary.
It is kind of scary.
Because if you hear something over and over,
Yeah.
you might start to believe it even if it's not true.
That's right.
Right, and that has a lot of implications, I think, for,
Huge implications.
yeah, like propaganda and marketing,
Absolutely.
all sorts of things.
Like even if,
Yeah.
a totalitarian state
Yeah,
wants to spread a message,
Yeah.
if they just keep repeating it over and over,
people will start to believe it.
people start to believe it.
Yeah, okay, so
Just through that familiarity.
System 1 can also tell when something is
Yeah.
out of the ordinary or surprising.
So it's very good at
Like unexpected.
detecting incongruity.
Okay.
So for example,
Yeah.
if you read the sentence, Earth revolves around the trouble every year,
Yeah.
your brain immediately flags trouble
Yeah.
as being wrong.
Now that makes sense.
It doesn't fit with
Yeah.
your understanding of the world,
But then there's this idea like jumping to conclusions, which I think is,
which is a big one.
yeah, it's kind of scary.
It is.
Oh.
And Kahneman calls this
Explain
YSIOD.
what you see is all there is.
What you see is all there is.
Okay.
And so basically what this means is that System 1 is very good at constructing coherent stories,
Okay.
but it does so based only on the information
Okay.
that is currently available.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily go out and search for
Yeah.
missing information.
So you can get like a biased.
It can be very biased
Yes.
of what's happening.
And so, for example, think about this statement. Will Mindick be a good leader? She is intelligent and strong.
I mean, those are
Success.
good qualities for a leader.
Those are good qualities.
Yeah.
But we're only getting a very limited snapshot of Mindick.
So we're jumping to a conclusion
We're jumping to a conclusion
based on
based on very limited information.
very limited information.
What if Mindick also has a
Yeah.
history of unethical behavior?
We don't know that.
Yeah.
Because we're only seeing what's presented to us.
Right. And System 1 is only working with what it's got.
And System 1 is...
It's not going to go search for more information.
Exactly. It's just going to take what's there and construct a story.
So I think this is a good point for like a takeaway for the learner.
Absolutely.
Is that when you're looking at a situation,
forming an opinion.
Yeah, when you're forming an opinion
about something,
ask yourself, is there information that's missing?
What am I not seeing?
Yeah, what am I not seeing?
What other information could be out there?
And how might that change my opinion?
Yeah, and this is so important because, we often make decisions based on very limited information.
Absolutely.
And if we don't take the time to seek out
we do it all the time.
more information,
Like, especially now.
we can make big mistakes.
Yeah, with social media and the way news is presented to us. Absolutely.
It's very easy to sort of fall into that trap.
It is.
Of just believing what you see.
And this leads to
Not necessarily questioning it.
all sorts of problems
Okay, so
in our personal lives.
we've talked about system one.
Yes.
Which is fast,
Or
automatic,
intuitive, emotional. Okay, so how does system 2 then come in?
So system 2 is engaged when system 1 encounters a question it can't answer immediately.
Okay.
So, for example, if you have to calculate 17 times 24,
that's going to take some effort.
you can't do that automatically. You have to engage
And it's not system 1.
system 2 to do that kind of mental work.
So is it like
It's also activated.
Is it like a backup system?
It's sort of a backup system, but it's also
like it's system 1?
It's also the system we use
Can't handle it.
when we need to control our attention
System 2's got to
or regulate our behavior.
step in.
So, for example, if you're trying to suppress an unwanted thought
Okay.
or resist a temptation,
Okay.
that's system 2 at work.
So if I'm trying not to eat that cookie,
Exactly.
that's system 2.
System 2 is working hard
Okay.
to keep you from eating that cookie.
Okay.
It's also activated when we're surprised
Okay.
by something unexpected.
Like if you're walking down the street
So there's this famous experiment called the gorilla experiment.
and a car almost hits you.
Yeah. Or
Okay.
in this experiment, people are asked to watch a video of people passing basketballs.
Uh-huh.
And they're told to count the passes.
Okay.
And while they're doing this, a person in a gorilla suit walks right through the middle of the scene.
Okay.
And amazingly, a lot of people
You don't see it?
completely miss the gorilla
Wow.
because they're so focused
That's so strange.
on counting the passes.
Okay.
They're not expecting to see a gorilla.
Their system 2 is not.
So their attention is narrowed
Done.
and system 2 is not activated
Okay. And
to detect this unexpected event.
completely oblivious.
Right.
Okay.
So
That's an example.
system 2 can also
System 2.
override
Yes.
our like habitual responses
It can override
through the use of
our habitual responses
what are they called?
through what Kahneman calls task sets.
Task sets.
So a task set
Okay.
is basically like a set of instructions that you give your mind
Okay.
to perform a specific task.
Okay.
So for example, if
Yeah.
I tell you
Come on.
to count all the instances of the letter F on this page,
Okay.
that's not something you do automatically.
Yeah.
You have to engage system 2
Yeah.
to program your mind
To follow that
to
instruction.
look for the letter F
Yeah.
and to count them.
Okay.
So that's a task set,
That makes sense.
and it overrides your usual reading habits.
Yeah. Where you would just normally scan the page.
Yeah, we don't usually count the Fs.
For meaning.
Right. Okay.
So system 2 is really important for controlling our behavior.
In system 2,
You can get tired.
yes,
That's right.
this is the concept of
Yeah, like it only has so much
ego depletion. So ego depletion is basically the idea that system 2 has a limited amount of mental energy.
Okay.
And so
So like if I'm trying to
when we engage in effortful tasks,
resist that cookie, that takes energy.
it depletes our mental resources. And this can make us,
And then if I want to do another thing,
to control ourselves
that requires
in subsequent tasks. So for example,
I'm going to be more likely to.
Roy Baumeister, who's a psychologist,
Given.
has done some fascinating studies on ego depletion.
Yeah.
And one of his classic studies
Okay.
involves cookies and radishes. Oh, I've heard about this.
So he brings people into the lab
Okay.
and he tells them,
Yeah.
okay, you can either eat these delicious cookies
Yeah.
or you can eat these bland radishes.
Right.
And of course, most people want to eat the cookies.
Yeah.
But some people are told,
Of course.
no, you have to eat the radishes.
Right.
So they have to exert self-control
Just the temptation.
to resist eating the cookies.
Okay.
And then afterwards,
Yeah.
they're given a task
Okay.
that requires
Another task.
mental effort.
Okay.
And what he finds is that the people who had to resist the cookies perform worse on the subsequent task.
So they used up...
Because they've depleted their
energy resisting the cookies.
Mental resources.
Yeah.
So this is ego depletion in action.
That's something to keep in mind.
It is. Like if you're...
And it has implications for all sorts of things.
Make a big decision or something. You want to make sure.
So, for example, that you have the energy for it.
If you're going to a really important meeting, or you're about to have...
So schedule it at the end of difficult conversation.
It's a long day.
You want to make sure.
When your system 2 is depleted.
You're not mentally depleted.
Okay.
Because if you are...
That makes sense.
You're going to be more likely to rely on system 1.
So there's this other example, too.
Make mistakes.
About system 2 being lazy.
Yes.
Right.
The bat and ball problem.
The bat and ball.
Is a classic example of this.
Do you want to remind us what that is?
Sure. So the problem is as follows.
Okay.
A bat and ball cost $1 more than the ball.
Okay.
The bat costs $1 more than the ball.
Okay.
How much does the ball cost?
10 cents.
That's what most people say.
That's the first thing that pops in my head.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's wrong.
Oh.
The correct answer is 5 cents.
Oh.
And the reason people get this wrong is that their system 1 jumps to an answer.
Yeah. 10 cents.
Yeah.
And their system 2
is too lazy
to check it.
Okay.
And so
the takeaway here,
even though the mental effort
is to actually
required to check it,
is very smart.
You not just assume that your system 1.
They just go with their intuition and they get it wrong.
Okay.
So
it's like
extra 5 seconds of thinking
of how system 2 can be very lazy.
Could save you.
And it's often operating
a big mistake
under the law of least effort.
Yeah.
So it's trying to conserve energy.
Okay, so let's move on to heuristics.
Okay.
Now, a heuristic is...
So a heuristic...
a mental shortcut.
Is a mental shortcut that our brains use to simplify decision-making.
Okay.
And they can be really useful.
They can be.
Because they save us time and effort.
But they can also lead us astray.
But they can also lead to systematic biases in our judgments.
So let's give some
for example,
examples of heuristics.
One of the most well-known heuristics is the availability heuristic.
Okay, so explain availability heuristic.
So the availability heuristic is basically where we judge the frequency or likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind.
Okay.
So if you can easily think of...
It's easy to remember...
examples of something...
I'm more likely to think...
You're more likely to overestimate...
It's common.
Its probability.
Okay.
So for example...
Yeah.
If you've recently seen a lot of news coverage... about shark attacks... You might overestimate...
Then I might be afraid to go in the water.
The likelihood of being attacked by a shark.
It's not that common.
Even if statistically, it's very rare.
So like news coverage can really...
And news coverage can have a huge impact.
Availability heuristic?
On our judgments.
Okay.
Because it makes certain events more salient.
Or available in
our minds.
Okay.
And this is why, it's so important to be critical of the news and to not just assume that what's being reported
just because they're talking about it
is necessarily representative of reality.
It doesn't mean that's
and
true.
Even our own
common or
choice of examples right now is being influenced by availability.
Right.
Like we're talking about shark attacks.
Yeah.
Because they're vivid and memorable.
Yeah.
But there are many other things
for sure.
that are more likely to kill us
that
we're not talking about.
So what's another?
That's just one example of how availability can bias our judgments.
Okay. Okay.
Another important heuristic is the representativeness heuristic.
Representativeness.
So the representativeness heuristic is where we judge the probability of something based on how similar it is to a typical example or a stereotype.
Okay.
So for example, if I describe someone as being very quiet, enjoys reading, prefers solitary activities, you might think,
librarian?
Oh, that sounds like a librarian.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But statistically, there are far more salespeople in the world than librarians.
Yeah, there are way more salespeople.
So even though this person might fit our stereotype of a librarian.
Totally fits the stereotype.
It's actually more likely
but it's not.
that they're a salesperson.
Statistically
just based on the base rates.
Okay, so that's another thing.
So that's the representativeness heuristic.
For the learner to keep in mind.
At work.
Right.
We're ignoring the base rates.
You can't just go on stereotypes.
Yes.
You have to.
We're focusing on similarity.
Look at the number.
Rather than probability.
Yeah. Okay, what's another one?
Another important heuristic is the anchoring effect.
Anchoring.
So the anchoring effect is the tendency to be influenced by an initial value.
Yeah.
Even if that value
even if it's random
is completely arbitrary.
Okay.
So for example, in one study, people were asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN.
Okay.
But before they gave their estimate, they were asked to
Yeah.
spin a Wheel of Fortune.
Okay.
And the Wheel of Fortune was rigged to either land on 10 or 65.
Okay.
And what they found was that the people who saw the number 65 gave much higher estimates
Wow.
than the people who saw the number 10.
That's a totally random number.
Even though the number from the Wheel of Fortune was completely irrelevant.
Okay, so what's the takeaway from that?
The takeaway is be aware that anchors can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
They can be completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
And they can still influence our judgments.
Okay, so
if you're negotiating a salary,
if it seems like a random number,
or buying a car, be aware of the first number.
It could still be influencing
that gets thrown out there.
Yeah.
Because that number could act as an anchor.
Okay, that's right.
It could bias your perception.
Interesting and kind of scary.
Of what's reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about heuristics. Now let's talk about...
And so there are many other heuristics.
Overconfidence.
But those are just a few examples.
So overconfidence is something I think we've all experienced.
Overconfidence is a pervasive problem.
Where you
human judgment.
You know what's going to happen.
Yes.
You're so sure of yourself.
We tend to.
And then you turn out to be wrong.
Overestimate our abilities. And our knowledge. And this can lead to all sorts of problems.
Kahneman, explain that.
So Kahneman talks about several different aspects of overconfidence.
Okay.
One of them is the illusion of understanding.
The illusion of understanding.
So the illusion of understanding is basically the idea that we tend to create coherent narratives of the past.
All right.
And this makes us think that we understand what happened better than we actually do.
Okay.
And it also makes us think that we can predict the future.
Well, we can always.
Better than we actually can.
Right.
So, for example, financial commentators often construct very compelling stories after market events.
To explain
what happened. And they make it sound
like they knew it all along.
Like these events were predictable.
Yeah.
But of course they didn't know it all along.
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20.
Right, hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah.
So the illusion of understanding
it's easy to
can lead us to be overconfident in our ability to predict the future. And this can lead to
we knew all along
bad decisions.
Okay.
Because we might take on more risk than we should.
Okay, so then there's
there's also the illusion of validity.
Illusion of validity.
Which is related to this.
So explain that.
So the illusion of validity is the tendency to have unwarranted confidence in our judgments.
Even when
we know
we're not usually right.
That our predictions are often inaccurate.
So like if I'm
Kahneman gets it
at sports game
from his own experience.
I'm still sure
in the Israeli army.
I'm going to win the bet this time.
Where he was developing.
That's the illusion of validities.
For interviewing recruits.
Okay.
And he knew, based on the data, that their predictions were barely better than chance.
Okay.
But they still felt very confident.
Oh, wow.
In each individual assessment.
Okay.
So that's the illusion of validity.
The lesson here is.
At work.
Don't be so sure of yourself, especially when you have a history where you be wrong.
Be willing to admit that you might be wrong.
Okay.
And be willing to seek feedback on your judgments.
Okay.
Because that's how you learn.
So what are some other...
And then there's also examples of overconfidence.
Yeah. Research by Philip Tetlock.
Okay.